All right, so I wanted to cover Final Fantasy again because an interview has just come out the other day. Actually, I think it was last night. Um, just sort of regarding the mixed reactions to Dawntrail. Yoshi P is seemingly aware of it. I mean, I'd be surprised if he wasn't, but I think uh, it's fair to say that this is probably the most he's been like addressed the fact that he's aware of it. Um, and he is sort of going over the fact that changes do need to happen. But I have already read through the article, obviously, and I'm going to sort of go through it and just sort of. I'm not going to like pull any snippets out and just start making things up. I'm going to throw in the full context. But I'm still a bit worried that I don't think he quite gets it. Um, so this, I will just say that this article um, has been translated. This text here was translated from German, which I assume the German was also translated from either Japanese or English beforehand. It'd be a bit weird if it was English, but yeah, this has probably gone through a couple translations, so I would say it's not too important to try and look too much into like the detail of individual words and stuff because it's just translation issues, right? It's going to be hard to yeah, anyways, let's just get on with it. So, so the interviewer basically just went up. The the source, by the way, is JP Games. They basically went up to Yoshi P and said, "You weren't surprised by the mixed reactions of Dawn Trail, as you said here in Cologne a year ago. Another year has passed since then, and you've gathered a lot of new feedback. Would you say that everything is going as expected?" And this is where Yoshi P comes back to say, firstly, Final Fantasy XIV is a live service title. It's always the case that we constantly look at player feedback and we improvise based on what we see. Of course, from the time of 1 year ago, it's not the case that we would continue our development without referring to player response at all. Okay, so this is where I get a bit worried about the translation. I'm wondering if this is just, just a saying or something. Like, I'm sure he's been listening to player player feedback for more than a year. I'd be a bit worried if that wasn't the case. But anyways, we're constantly adjusting and tweaking, improvising where we can in response to player feedback when we're creating content. So basically, suggesting that they're always moving. They're always making adjustments to what people are saying, and I don't disbelieve this. I'm not like gonna sit here and say that FF aren't listening to anything the community is saying. They're obviously, whenever they're making these decisions, it's obviously in response to a group of members in the community. Like somebody is saying to them, please give us this, please give us that. And it almost feels like they'll do what they can, right? Which is fair. But so this was actually something that was raised to me in another comment. I've got it here. Basically, someone left a comment on my one of my other videos, and it brings up a few valid points, but and I think it's sort of worth going over, which is why I actually have my whiteboard today. Um, but basically, the idea is that it's not so hard to listen to player feedback and stuff like that, and that's true, right? It's really hard to sort of get player feedback because you've got so many different angles coming at you, and everyone is wanting different things, everyone is wanting opposing things, and you just can't really tell who you should listen to, right? And I think for me, this is one of the biggest issues is that the developers don't really understand what the identity of their own game is if they aren't just sticking to one thing and just going with it, right? And this is I'm gonna get on with the point here. So the issue is that Final Fantasy's current way to respond to feedback is to just keep going back and forth. Right? They'll hear 1 minute there's too much healing or the dungeons are too hard, and so then they'll go back the other way and make the dungeons too easy and make healing, pointless or whatever. Like it just keeps going back and forth with these patches. 1 minute we're complaining about one thing, and the next we're complaining about the other. So, for example, what the devs end up doing is you've got you've got two sides basically, right? You've got one side here and one side here. We'll say this group here wants the color green, right? And this side here wants the color red. Assuming that's visible. Barely. But either way, right? So we are effectively here right now in the content. And what ends up happening is, let's say green ends up being louder than red. So, in fact, you know what? I can make this bigger. Sorry. Here we go. Bam. Alright. So, green ends up being louder than red, right? And so, in response, the devs will be like, well, we should give more green, right? Clearly, more people are talking about it, more people want it. We'll just do it, right? But they don't go all the way, mind you. They will budge, like, here, right? This is where we end up in the next patch, effectively. So then when the next patch comes out, for the rest of that patch, you have this side now being more vocal than this side, because this side is pissed that they got less red and more green. This is, I feel like such an idiot. I feel like I'm trying to explain this to toddlers. That's not the case, I just want to point that out. But anyways, the devs hear this, and then they respond, and they go, okay, next patch, we're gonna put it over here instead, right? And then what happens? In the next patch, you've then got green now complaining that they want more green again, and it's just, all you end up doing is just going back and forth between these two little points in the scale, and you're basically just wobbling the needle, right? You're not going anywhere. No changes are effectively being made, you're just constantly going back and forth between two very loud bickering groups. It isn't really, like, going anywhere, and my biggest issue is that, like, sure, it's a risk, but I think that at this point, they need to commit to something, right? They need to just go, fuck it, we'll go all the way, right? We'll just full send it, see how it goes, right? Some people will be pissed, some people will be happy, some people might not even care, but at the end of the day, I think the issue that they have is that they don't seem to realize that you just can't please everybody, right? You've got to settle somewhere. You've got to pick, this is what I want the game to be, and, you know, this part of the community are going to help me make this game that way. You cannot just fucking throw out a wide net and expect everyone to be happy. It's not possible, right? So This is one of the biggest issues, I would say, with the feedback side of things, right? In fact, it is the biggest issue with the feedback side of things, is that we're just constantly going back and forth. Nothing's really changing, right? And when it does, it's minuscule. It is absolutely tiny, and it just keeps going back. Now, I'm going to continue. Anyways, this was just a tangent I wanted to get off on. Literally speaking, not figuratively. But yeah, I'll keep reading down here, and yeah, there is something that I feel particularly these past 3 months, rather than it being the players of Final Fantasy XIV. I think that in terms of the overall world, and what I mean by that is that it's not limited to Dawntrail, but in terms of overall base game design for Final Fantasy XIV, basically saying that he's realized that the issue isn't just Dawntrail, which is good. I would say that's a step forward. He's saying that the issue is Final Fantasy XIV itself. And it is, right? Final Fantasy XIV is using an archaic engine, and there needs to be some changes. But that's not quite where he goes, right? But I'll go through it anyways. I think that there needs to be a restructure about how we approach content hierarchy in game design, because content hierarchy is part of the game's design. I started to feel recently particularly that the way that things are structured in Final Fantasy XIV no longer matches the player's preferences, and this is something that I started to feel after we entered this year, and so I felt that we are now at a time where we need to incorporate a major change in the content hierarchy and also the game's design. This is limited not just to expansions, but to the overall development of Final Fantasy XIV. So yeah, he's basically saying that they need to change the way that they release content. The whole content hierarchy thing is, sort of can be a bit open to interpretation what that's really suggesting. But I'm pretty sure in this he's more referring to what to prioritize. Because there's a lot of discussion about down the line. We'll get to it obviously, but there's a lot of discussion about the priority, like handling the balance between casual, mid-core, and hardcore content. So I think that might have a bit of a shake-up if this is what he's... If that's what he means by content hierarchy, that's what he's sort of going after. But when we look at the content hierarchy, we feel that it has worked well as it was up until now. It has been employed right back from the time of A Realm Reborn until patch 7.2. And it has always worked well until now. So that's wrong. I mean, it has been used up until patch 7.2 and to 7.3, but it didn't work up until 7.2. Okay, it fell off. Like, this is obviously going to seem like I'm speculating or like making up things, but it was very easily noticeable after Endwalker that everything started to fall off. Right? I'm not saying immediately after Endwalker. Like, 6.1 was still pretty decent. I remember having some fun with that. 6.2 was kind of where, like, it was okay, but then everything kind of just went downhill from there. And not everyone felt that way, right? Like, I'm not saying that everyone hated the game, but this is where the trend began to fall, right? Where the cracks were starting to show, and it has effectively led up until now, where everything is on the surface now, and it's just leaving mold everywhere. So yeah, it's good to see that he's understanding that there's problems. Obviously, I'm not gonna like sit here and berate or belittle. Like, I think it's just important to. I think it's important that he is at least aware. I think that is a step forward. But anyways, where did I get to? Sorry. 7.2. Yeah. Okay. So, but I feel now we need to advance more, change the content hierarchy, but also change the design itself within the hierarchy. It has worked well in the past 12 years, but now we feel, from our perspective, it needs change. It needs change, and we are excited about that change and the prospect of changing it for the future of the game. So they are looking at changing some things, but we'll get into that. So, interviewer responds, that sounds very interesting, and above all, substantial. Could you perhaps explain these changes in a little more detail? And then he goes on to say, if I started talking about this, I'll need basically a lot of time to explain it. Oh, here we go. Yeah, so it was in Japanese. So this has been translated from Japanese to German to English. So yeah, just now that, just wanted to clear that up. I used some content to explain the first steps of the new approach. Nope, never mind. I'm an idiot. That was talking about the live letter. Ignore everything I just said. I have no idea if this was originally in Japanese. If the players have not seen this yet, I would really appreciate if they could take time to watch that. Okay, so he's basically talking about the plans that he has to change the content hierarchy. He's referring to Pilgrim's Traverse, or whatever it's called. Yeah, Pilgrim's Traverse. Basically adding in the new difficulty modifiers for the final boss or whatever of the thing. I haven't looked too much into Pilgrim's Traverse. I've heard about the difficulty modifiers. It sounds a bit like if you're a WoW player to a degree, it sounds like, you know, mythic dungeons and stuff where you've just got like these extra modifiers, except it seems like you can choose what modifiers you want. Um, but yeah, I think they're this is a trial, right? Effectively, this is, and I don't mean a Final Fantasy trial. I mean a trial for players to test, see how the community reacts and stuff like that. And I don't think the concept is a bad idea. I think it's a nice concept. In fact, it's, I like the ability to adjust difficulty. Hello. No, you're not touching the pins. I like the idea to adjust difficulty because it does give access to to a lot more people, and it makes a bit more like it gives more varieties for fun. Hello, you need the toilet, don't you? Do you? Fuck. Okay, let's go. He's basically suggesting that this could be what the future content will look like, right? This is going to be the form of what content's going to look like down the line. And we have yet to see if this is a good or bad thing, like if they've executed it properly or not, whether people will like it or not, but we'll see. So for the first step in that direction, we will be releasing new content patch 7.35, so I'd really appreciate if the players could take the opportunity to play that content, and I'd love to hear their feedback. It would be great to hear whether they thought it was fun or not, or whether they have any specific feedback about things they want changed. This new content that will be coming in the patch is called Pilgrim's Traverse, so I'd really love if players do check that out and let me know their thoughts. So yeah, this is going to be a bit of a trial run, effectively. So I will try to provide a simple summary and keep it short. So when A Realm Reborn was originally released 12 years ago, of course that's the starting point for the game as an MMORPG. It's inevitable that there isn't enough content in the game. Of course, we want to introduce new content. We want to introduce and update it as quickly as possible. And in the starting days of an MMO, that is the only thing you can do to expand it. Which is true. There wasn't really much going on in the game at the time, so yeah, it was probably very easy to build up on top of it. When we think about how we can efficiently produce content and quickly release it, that forms the basis of the base game design of the game and releasing content. And that basically formulates what we call the content hierarchy and the base game design of Final Fantasy XIV. I'll explain it in a hopefully easy to follow fashion. So he gets like... he basically gets a bunch of sweets on the table to sort of describe the three types of players. But there's a problem with his statement, and I don't know, maybe this is just me being a bit petty, but the idea that they need to try and make new content that like has to meet a specific window of time and they have to quickly release it doesn't make sense to me. Like, obviously they are clearly rushing, right? It's very noticeable. But there's just not a lot that's actually coming out, right? Compared to what used to come out in the small amount of time that it used to come out in. You know, patch windows used to be 3 months. You know, I went over this in my other video, but there was, you know, the point X1 patches would come out like a week later. The point X5, God, this is so confusing. The point X5 patches came out in a month. You know, it was things like that really just kind of, like, when content wasn't that good, it was still fine, I guess, because it was coming out very frequently. Now you wait 4 months for a patch, you wait 2 months for your X5 patch, and for some reason, like, a month for the X1 patch, which I think this is the first time this has happened. I could be wrong, don't actually quote me on that. Like, it's been increasing, right? The X1 patches, at least. But either way, like, it doesn't seem like that's... How you go from producing less content over more time spent to develop is confusing to me, right? Maybe I'm not seeing something. Maybe there's something going on that would make everything make sense. But there's a lot of theories I could suggest, which are the fact that they probably have no longer have any of the original crew, so there's going to be a lot of interns and stuff who are just making whatever shit up, and this is what we have now. Speculation, right? That's just me. But yeah, it doesn't seem like anything's necessarily like this is being upheld, right? The whole we're going to make things as quickly as possible and we want to make sure it's content and stuff like that. It's just, for me, in my opinion at least, the content they're releasing is not really something that I would typically call content. I mean, by definition it's content, but is it something I would play? Not as much anymore, right? It's just, okay, now I'm just rambling. I'm getting heated. I need to chill because I oh, let's just move on. We have a hardcore bat. We have hardcore bat. So this is him describing the sweets. He's got his three little sweets, or three little packets of sweets, and he says we have hardcore battle content, casual player content, and midcore content. If you have two types of each, that means six total of total of six types of content. From a developer's perspective, we would broadly categorize the community of players into different groups, and we would plan based on that. We would release content based on that plan, tailored towards a specific group of players. So effectively, this is the content hierarchy, if I've understood it correctly. This is how it's currently designed. They aim to release two things for each group of players each patch. So I would imagine things like crafting, dungeons, trials being like casual player, I guess. The mid-core being more like experts and maybe normal raids. I'm not too sure, but like, and then obviously your hardcore battle content being savage, ultimates and stuff like that. So yeah, that means so basically implying that it's all very very equally divided. I no, I'm gonna leave it till later. That means as developers, when we're looking at certain types of content, we can think about this content being only for a certain type of player. On the other hand, for this type of content, points to the hardcore content, when we're producing it, we don't have to think about casual players. For the past 12 years, we have carried out our development based on this policy. Yeah, so my issue is with this is that, yeah, I'm gonna get into it. So the issue isn't the content hierarchy. It isn't how much you're producing, or like how it's divided. Rather, it's got nothing to do with the fact that you allocate this much to casual, you allocate this much to midcore, or you allocate this much to hardcore. Personally, for me, I find the problem is that there's no variety, there's no diversity in the content, and I think that that is an issue that a lot of people are starting to see, right? And it's something that's also being retroactively uh, done, so to speak. So, for example, casual player content, right? Let's say dungeons and trials. Every dungeon in the game is probably about 15 minutes, right? Probably about 15 minutes. You spend 3 minutes clearing trash packs and 2 minutes clearing a boss. You then spend 3 minutes clearing trash packs and 2 minutes clearing a boss. And then you spend about 3 minutes clearing trash packs and 2 minutes clearing a boss. That happens almost every single dungeon. It's almost every dungeon in the game at this point. Because, as I said, they've been retroactively gutting other dungeons to be the same. And it's just... I don't see that as, like, content, right? It's sure it's for casuals, but even a casual would see that they're just doing the same thing over and over and over again. Like, the boss mechanics aren't really that diverse either. There's not much going on to make players like to just give any sort of difficulty or like any change, any challenge. Like, I get that it's for casuals, but like, here's a wild idea. Make a 5 minute dungeon. I don't know, a 20 minute dungeon. Just go crazy. Like, have a dungeon that's just one boss. At the end of the dungeon, you've got a few ad packs there, and then, you just get one really big boss fight at the end. Have a dungeon that's... Just create some variety. Because back in the day, you know, people like hated Aurum Vale and stuff like that. I mean, probably still do, but like people hated the way certain ARR dungeons worked and stuff like that. And of course, like it's not necessarily good to make bad content, but it's not necessarily a bad idea to keep it in there. You know, having that diversity, having players, having content where some players would like it because they like to seek the challenge. And okay, now I'm sort of getting into hardcore, mid-core, casual territory, but this is still casual, right? Having something like Aurum Vale being really difficult and then having other dungeons being really easy is a good thing. Being able to have something bad so that you can say something else is good and you can appreciate the good thing more is a good thing. Like, you need it to be that way. When everything is the same, there is there's just nothing. It's all grey. You know, there's like, you don't care about the dungeons. There's no, you only talk about the latest dungeon now because the latest dungeon is the thing being farmed. But once the latest dungeon is done, it's in the past. There's nothing like to remember about it. There's nothing to memorize. Like, it's just not important, you know. But back in the day, you had all these dungeons that were a bit hard, and I'm not saying that like these have to be hard, but you have to have something to. It has to have some reason to be memorable, you know. And these dungeons just don't have that anymore. And they're also just getting rid of that from ARR and Heavensward dungeons, and it's just like there's just nothing left in terms of identity. So there's just nothing, right? Anyways, this is also happening with trials as well. Every trial is a 10-minute fest of just fucking doing damage to a boss. You know, you've got all these things like interrupts, sleep, stuns that you can just never use in any content that has a boss, which to me is just awful. Right? Don't get me wrong. I know, yes, you can now. What is it? You can now stun an ad in spoilers. You can now stun an ad in one of the Savage raids, and like that's like the biggest breakthrough of the year for the game right now. But that's really kind of it, you know. I don't get why CCing things is meant to be considered a hardcore thing. CCing things should be just, you know, taught early on, and then it's not a hardcore thing. It's not that hard to understand that. But yeah, it would be nice if there was some like player agency in battles. You know, everything being 10 minutes is so dull as well. Having ways to clear it faster, having ways to clear it smoother would be nice, right? Just forcing everyone into a time locked instance is. Oh man, maybe it's just me, but it's so ass. Like, I play so many other MMOs all the time, and everything goes down either really fast or really slow, all depending on how the players have like built their characters and how players resolve mechanics and stuff like that. And yeah, you could say the same for Final Fantasy, but it's often always at the 10-minute mark that you get the clear. If you're not clearing at the 10-minute mark, you're effectively wiping. Or you've got a fucking warrior who's just standing there for the next 30 minutes while everyone else is on the ground begging him to wipe. Anyways, God, I really went off on a tangent there. My point being is that it's not an issue of like the mixture of the content. It's more an issue of what the content provides, right? It's anyways. They like I said as well, like it does seem like they want to try and make some changes, but I don't know if the changes they're making are well thought out. But yeah. So where the fuck was I? That means as developers we're working on Cento players, right? I'll go back from the top. Fuck it. So basically saying we have hardcore, casual, midcore, 2 types of each, meaning a total of 6 types. From a developer's perspective, we would broadly categorize the community of players into different groups. And we would plan based on that. We would release content based on that plan, tailored towards specific groups of players. means as developers we're working on a certain type of content, we can think about this content being only for a certain type of player. On the other hand, sorry, RuneScape stuff. On the other hand, for this type of content, points to the hardcore content, when we're producing it, we don't have to think about casual players. Okay, yeah, this is where we left off. If we wanted to continue following this policy, but if we continue to follow this policy, and to provide one example from the casual player's perspective, from their perspective, even though this content, the hardcore content, is implemented in the game, it's almost the same as being non-existent to them. Which is true. Like, that is exactly how it is, right? Like, for a lot of casual people, when a patch comes out that's like, oh, Ultimate released, or Savage released, or this and that, it's just like, cool, so, new dungeon? Like, and that's about it, right? That's all they get is a new dungeon. And that's fair. Like, that's a very good point. Like, I think that can be a major issue for the casual player base. And on the flip side, yeah, so on the flip side, from a hardcore player's perspective, that content, the casual content, is also non-existent. Which I wouldn't say is necessarily true. You do have to do the casual content as a hardcore player. Like, if you want to get your grinding, grind out your tomes and shit like that, you will end up doing the casual content. Someone's got to make you that food so you can fucking raid, man. Like, someone's got to make money so that you can buy that fucking food. But anyways, but we say to them, and he's referring to all the content, the sweets on the table that he's using as an example here. Hey, look at how much content you've got to play. So this policy we had went well, but I could say that it went too well, because now we've created so much new content that the players are telling us, oh, well, the content has nothing to do with me, I don't care. So I don't think that's necessarily the biggest response that people... Like, I think this is a weird line, saying, hey, look how much content you've got to play, because there's not that much content to play. Let's be realistic here. Sure, like... Oh, man, I don't know how to get into this without getting mad. It's not that there's, like... There's not much reason to do most of the hardcore content in the game, besides just clearing it for your own personal gain. But it's just that there's no great reward in Final Fantasy XIV. There's nothing that really stands out. You can't really have something that, you can really brag about, because it's just that... Okay, let's use an example here. So, when you complete a Savage tier, mounts drop, right? A mount drops, and you can win the mount, and then you can show off the mount, right? It's nice you have that mount, and everyone who sees you on that mount will be like, damn, you cleared that Savage. Obviously that doesn't happen, but, in the player's mind, as a player who has collected things in games, you always like to show that stuff off, even if nobody's looking. Right? So, the fact that, like, a lot of the stuff that you can show off in the game doesn't really, like... You can't actually show off mounts, effectively, because the places where most people are in cities. So the thing that you get to show off at the end of the fight, at the end of the Savage tier, is not something you can even show off to anybody unless you're at a housing ward and everybody's just there for some reason. Like, it just doesn't seem that rewarding, and I don't know, like, maybe that's just me. I mean, it probably is just me, but I don't really feel as though the rewards for clearing content in the game is that important, right? Nothing really, like, screams this is valuable anymore. Because, especially in the eyes of Savage content, you are clearing to get better gear. Hello, yes, okay. No, stop trying to lick the pens. You are clearing to get better gear, but this better gear basically becomes redundant in the next patch. So it almost feels pointless, right? And especially as a lot of the gear, maybe you're getting it for glamour reasons, but a lot of the gear just tends to be, like, repurposed, sets from other patches. It's just... nothing really strikes as unique anymore. Nothing strikes as, making people want to do the hardcore content, because there's not really much to gain from it anymore. I'm not saying, and to be fair, I'm not saying that like back then it was any better or worse. Like, it was the same, but it was less noticeable. It was less punishing, I guess, because now they've started making content like a bit too, like, they've made the hardcore content. Okay, so this is actually, you know what? This is another point I wanted to get into. I haven't found the time to do it, but effectively, they seem to just keep spreading the gap between the casual and the hardcore, right? Casual content is getting too casual. It's way too easy, right? And hardcore content is getting too hard. It's way too hard. And also, I guess you could say mid-core content, like extremes and stuff, are starting to get even harder as well. Like, everything is just, like, spreading out, and there's just this gap in the middle now where there's just no, like, the balance is just all off, right? And it's just... maybe I'm going off on a bit of a tangent, but it just doesn't make any sense to me that, like, you would want to do this extremely difficult content for such a small reward that is going to be thrown away in the next patch anymore. Like, it would be fine if it wasn't so ridiculously hard. But again, this could be me being, like, it might be a subjective take. Like, I enjoyed the last expansions, Savage, up until a point. This one, man, I just, maybe I'm just not into it. I have no idea, but I'm definitely not enjoying it. I was enjoying it. Don't get me wrong. There was some good moments, but anyways, I really, really do need to stop just going off on these. I think the sentiment of saying, look how much you've got to play, it doesn't really help, right? Because there's not that much to play. There's not that much that people would want to play, right? Just because you release a hardcore piece of content doesn't mean that every hardcore player is going to enjoy that hardcore content. Doesn't mean that every casual player is going to enjoy that casual content. So it's not just a case of, yes, this casual player is going to look at the hardcore content and be like, that doesn't exist to me. They're also going to look at the casual content and say, this sucks. Like, it's really that simple, you know? But anyways, let's continue. So what I want to say is that, of course, for the top tier players, we know that the content tailored towards them is needed, and we will continue to produce that content, pointing at one of the hardcore suites. And on the other side of the spectrum, for the really casual players, we also understand that the content is also needed, that content is also needed, and we will continue to produce that, pointing at one of the casual suites. So we will continue to tailor content for both ends of the spectrum. And this is what I was kind of saying, is that effectively what ends up happening is they end up spreading the spectrum wider, and the mid-core gap is just turning into a bigger gap, right? But anyways, what we're trying to do now is change the design so that we have content which can be enjoyed by everyone. Sorts mid-core okay, so he's just playing around with a bunch of stuff. So from these players' perspectives, hardcore players, there would be 5 types of content, and for other players' perspectives, casuals, there's also 5 types. And to put it simply, that's it. Thank you. So I'll just finish this. I tried to explain it really simple, but what we're trying to do will require us approaching all the designs and also changes in the workflow. And I think since we're doing something new, it is necessary for us to move forwards. And at this prospect, I'm super excited. But this total concept of what we're doing, there's so much behind it that if there was an opportunity to go to some sort of games conference and maybe spend 2 hours to talk about it, that'd be great. At the end of the day, players don't really need to think about it that much. Well, that's where you're a bit wrong, but anyways, all they need to know is that the development team is working on something, and because of that, if players would be interested and motivated to provide us their feedback, that would be great. It's a bit of a weird take to just be like, don't worry guys, we got this, because I feel like that's been the case for the last few years now, and it's probably safe to say you don't got this, but it's not like the players can really change that anyway. So you're right. We shouldn't worry. And we should just continue to voice our feedbacks, which is important, right? Like I know I sound like I'm clowning there, but like I genuinely that is important. Um, anyways, that was the end of the article. Now, I already went off on so much to basically say why I disagreed with like some of what he was saying here, like why it was a bad move. And I'll just try and get into a bit more depth. Like this was something I kind of wanted to do in another video, and I still might. But I feel like, at least in my opinion, the biggest issue with the game isn't the content prioritization, but more rather the content quality, the lack of new content. Not, and when I say new content, I don't mean how often we get dungeons, right? Like, that's not it, right? It's more how often we get something that is actually like outside of the box, something that isn't like that we would never have thought was mechanically possible in this game, you know? I feel like there's a lot that's missing in terms of like fresh ideas, even though there are plenty of fresh ideas that they could take from. There are so many MMOs in the world that are doing so many different things that they could be copying from. Now, Pilgrim's Traverse, the whole idea of like difficulty modifiers and stuff like that, this is an example of a good thing, I would say. Whether or not you know, we need to see how it's executed first, because I don't think we have any more info on that. But it basically sounds like something like Hades or something, where you can apply difficulty modifiers. I think that's a better example than WoW. But I think that's a nice touch. We still need to see what the content's going to be like, because if it's still going to be a 10-minute slog, then I'm going to be pissed. But again, that's just my opinion. I just think that they need to start like exploring more ideas to expand. So this is, I'm going to get into sort of where I think they need to start making changes. This is sort of less on his takes, Yoshi P's takes, and more on what I think. So I think they need to start expanding the use of the game world, right? There is no reason to go anywhere right now. Everything is instance based. All the content is done in an instance. There's no reason to ever go to any part of the world, the actual game world that has been established since ARR, for any reason other than to maybe do fates for like, you know, like not even the recent Fate Relic grind, whatever, that I say recent, few months ago. That even that just keeps you in the latest content. But like, there should be stuff like, for example, and spoilers if you haven't played Endwalker, although I'd be surprised if you were here and you hadn't played Endwalker, but it would have been cool if they had something similar to like hunt trains and stuff like that, something similar to Fates, sort of like an in-between. So this was an idea I just sort of have been sort of floating around my friends, and I thought it was a cool idea, where you could have world events, right? Something that gets announced in just your chat window or something like that. Just be like, this thing has happened, you know, everyone go and get it. You know, big warning, the world is in danger or whatever, you know, like. So what I'm basically getting at with the Endwalker thing is, there was a moment in Endwalker where in the role quests you found out that there were people around the world who were turning into blasphemies, right? And it would have been good if they sort of capitalized on that and been like, hey man, there's these blasphemies around the world that need to be taken care of. And they just randomly pop up, and it's like a big event, you know, like maybe a bunch of blasphemies or whatever you want to call them. You know, just like a crazy thing that like the community just will get together to do in the game world. The game world that has already been established. The reason why I say it would be a bit different to hunt trains and stuff is because this would be something for just the entire community to do, right? Like, it's not, you have to be in a link shell, you have to be in the Discord. Nope, you just see it pop up and then you just go do it. And obviously there would have to be some sort of reward. That is another thing. That is another nugget I want to crack into. Um, so one of the other issues is, like I was saying earlier, nothing is particularly rewarding, right? There is no real game reward at this point because you can't really do things like mountain cities. You can't really do things like um, customize gear. There's really nothing you can do to just, like, there's no toys in the game that you could just have fun with. So for example, like in WoW, you could have a toy, like a gadget that shrinks your character, just a little goofiness, right? A little bit of fun just to like fuck around, basically. None of that exists, right? At most you have to buy an emote that costs about £6 so that you can eat an egg in front of people. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I don't really get the value behind it, or maybe it is the most genius play they've ever fucking done. But anyways, there's just a massive lack of like rewards, and I feel like if they expanded what type of what type of stuff the game had, what type of collections the game could deliver, like what type of just literally anything, right? Oh my god, what is you're not touching the pens. Literally anything, right? To just expand like what you can, like what type of content you can add to the game as well, right? It God, sorry, I'm getting distracted. Can you stop sniffing my leg? It would do the game so much good to just start expanding the collection side of things, right? And I guess this is the next tangent I'm going to go off on. I'm really gonna start losing it, but hopefully I'll get some sleep tonight. But the other tangent is, this is more like in regards to casual content, but they wanted to expand, like, or they wanted to add more casual content, for example. But like, I really don't see how it can be so difficult. There is a lot of casual content you could add to the game. We literally are playing a game that is a host to many mini games that they do not capitalize on, right? Triple Triad is a massive one. uh you've got Mahjong, and then you've got a ton of other stuff going on in the Gold Saucer. You could start expanding on these games, adding another mini game to the pool. Like, I don't know, you love to copy references so much, why not bring in Tetramaster, right? Like, I'm not going to say Blitzball. Everyone says Blitzball. It's not going to happen. I don't want to play Blitzball in that latency. But there's so many other things that they could be doing to just expand on, like, the collective side of the world, which would then just expand what they could add to the game as rewarding, right? And so, just having those things be available to everyone would be so nice. And then you could start adding, like I said, the whole adding these world events that specifically reward you these things. Maybe after doing a certain number of clears, maybe you get a specific, oh god, I shouldn't say this, but a specific currency, which is my next tangent. Give us a place to put all our fucking currencies. Stop giving us currencies in our inventory. Okay, enough is enough with the goddamn, like, coins from raids, the fucking totems from extremes, the books from raids and savages. Like, there's too many, and it needs to stop. Okay, just put it all in one place. Anyways, so I'm gonna just try and cut to the chase. So my greatest issue with the game is three major components, right? Three major components that kind of coalesce with one another, right? And I feel like this is going to be ones that, I'm going to write it down so that it doesn't get, so that it's just there, it's important. So you've got your let me wipe this off. So the three things that I sort of say kind of coalesce with each other, that are equally taking each other down along with the game with it, is, how do I phrase this one? We'll call it skills, right? So that's referring to your player skills, not like you as a player, as an individual, get fucking good kind of thing, but more the rotation, right? And I'll get into that anyways. I'll get into a sec. The other part is gear, right? Gear is another massive issue right now. This is another factor that's fallen completely stagnant. And lastly, it's just, I guess we'll call it boss mechanics, right? Or just gameplay. We'll call it. We'll call it game. We'll call it combat, right? So, effectively, the issue is that you have these three components that are all sitting in formulas that are painfully obvious. They are not deviating in any possible way, right? You have your skills, right? We'll start with that. Skills which are currently being designed to fit a 2-minute rotation. Now, this is going to be the one that everyone's heard, if you've been listening to all the complaints, that is the class homogenization, where everyone is basically just doing the same thing but in a different suit. Everyone's doing the same thing for 2 minutes, and it is noticeable, right? Like, you have your 2-minute burst window, and then after you've done your 2-minute burst, you're then just coasting along, right? You're doing practically nothing until the 1-minute mark, where you do a little bit of something, but then you're back to doing nothing again, right? And this is becoming an issue, right? But it's not an issue on its own. Now, there are ways to fix this, but it would require, literally, at least in my opinion, what I would say is a good way to fix this is to nuke the entire 2-minute rotation system and take a page out of the PvP actions book. It's so much nicer to have more skills to be more active with your skills, and to be able to react depending on the situation with those skills. It's so much nicer to just have things that you just keep popping off as quickly as possible. And sure, you can have like 30-second cooldowns, 45-second. And you can have a 2-minute cooldown for something, but you don't need so many things to have a 2-minute cooldown. And you don't need so many things to have a 1-minute cooldown. You don't need so many things on your hotbar. You should not have to press across 3 different hotbars to do your rotation. It's insane, right? Like, obviously it's normalized at this point, but it is kind of insane. Like, all these things are just starting to be the same. I would really like it if we had something akin to PvP actions in our PvE content. That would be a lot more lively, there would be a lot more action going on, and you would feel like you're really doing something, you would be more in control. Anyways, I'll come back to that, because like I did say, these all sort of connect. So the next issue is gear. There is 0 gear diversity, right? Sure, you have your skill speed builds and like your crit builds or whatever, but at the end of the day, they don't really make a massive difference, right? You are still playing the character the same way you would play it in any other situation. You're still doing your rotation the same as any other person would do in their build, because you can't really deviate, right? You are doing exactly what the developers have designed for you to do, because they are effectively creating everything on a strict schedule. I do not see the point of the current gearing system, because there is no value to the gear. And yes, every MMO does this, right? Every MMO replaces gear after X amount of content. Like, yeah, it's normal. But it just doesn't feel rewarding when everyone else is just gonna get the same thing. When you play other MMOs, there are rare gear drops, right? There are rare gear drops, and it's not just that they're like, they do more damage. They have effects on them that affect your class, right? They have some impact to your class that changes the way you play. And that's why I wanted to start off with skills. Because let's say, for example, you've got these PvP actions that pop off. You've got one that pops off every 30 seconds, right? And you acquire a really rare weapon that has a specific ability, that has a specific, like, trait on it that, you know, there's a chance. Like, you would say the trait would just say something like 10% chance on getting hit that your cooldown for this skill will reset. Stuff like that, you know, just goofy little things to make it feel like the player has more agency, right? It's just things like that, like set bonuses as well. You could have set bonuses where, like, you know, every time you do a crit, you gain a stack of something. Once you gain 3 stacks of this thing, you unleash a torrent of damage. You know, just goofy things to give more diversity to the gear. Like, have different things that people can equip so that, you know, you don't feel like you're just locked into just going up this linear fucking ladder, you know, just not really getting to decide how you want to create your builds, right? Not really getting to decide. Like, at the end of the day, right, it is obvious that it's just number go up. No matter how you do it, number just go up, right? It's as simple as that. But it's all about creating the illusion of control, right? The illusion that you are, in fact, making a difference. And it works in a lot of games, but it doesn't really work that well in this. But yeah, so moving on to the last bit is the combat. So this one is more referring to boss mechanics and stuff like that. But this is where these two sort of tie in. These two issues become one, right? Or these 3 issues become one, even. So everything right now is designed around a 10-minute formula, right? Of course, you've got, like, the final tier of a savage, which takes sometimes 12 minutes or something, and you've got the ultimates, which are like 15 minutes. I don't know. But they're always on the same time, right? And for me, this is starting to become a very noticeable issue, not just because it's formulaic, but because of the way that skills are designed, because of the way that, like, the gear scaling is designed. Nothing ever changes, right? You are always doing the same pattern over 10 straight minutes. You are just repeating the same thing across that hotbar in every single piece of content, and it just does not work anymore. At least it was fine when the game was fresh, but it's not fine anymore, you know. And to sort of really, like, try to explain how this could be made better is you could just, instead of having bosses, so a lot of the bosses in content, especially like the harder content, you have 10 minutes of a fight. Every minute you get one mechanic, effectively. I'm not including raid wides. I'm just like, or tank busters. I'm just talking about actual mechanics. Every minute you get like one mechanic on average, and everything has to be built around the 2-minute window, and everything has to be built around, like, you know, your gears score and stuff like that, the damage you're outputting and the damage you're being dealt has to be made sure that you can do this for 10 minutes, and if you can't do it in 10 minutes, you wipe, right? I think that is so outdated at this point that it's just, things would be so much better if they just decided to throw out the formulas and just say, fuck it, we're gonna make this one fight like 5 minutes long, but it's going to be the most intense fucking shit show of mechanics. You are just constantly running around. You are constantly just mashing. Like, I'm talking about using the new my idea of what these skills, like a PvP action rotation. You know, you just got everyone just mashing out these fucking skills as quickly as possible. You're constantly in burst mode, and the fight just goes on for like 5 minutes. And it's not that it should enrage after 5 minutes, but rather, you know, it should be getting harder to keep people alive, right? Like, one of the biggest issues in content right now is that healers are for some reason DPS, and tanks are also for some reason DPS, when that shouldn't be the case. Tanks and healers should be it should effectively be tanks are doing everything they can to stay alive, healers are doing everything they can to keep the tanks alive, and it is up to those two to stretch out the fight for as long as possible, right? Once the healer runs out of resources and the tank runs out of resources, that's when the fight should be over. Now, I'm not saying that like there shouldn't be any like hard cap to the fight. Obviously, there should be a soft end rage, right? The boss gets stronger, so it gets harder to recoup your resources, and eventually you just fall over and die. But like, it's just so awkward now that like everything is just on this fucking fixed pattern. You could have bosses that just do like mechanics in random orders. You could have bosses that you could actually interrupt from doing certain mechanics every now and then, you know, just anything crazy. Maybe savage content you shouldn't be able to just interrupt, you know, a major mechanic, but like I don't know, like it's really not that hard to come up with new ideas. To say that they're all going to be great ideas is obviously just bullshit. Like I'm not going to say that I'm coming up with the best ideas, but there is a mountain of choices that they refuse to take, right? They refuse to move away from the current formula. And my biggest concern is about this whole article is that this isn't going to see the change that we want it to be. Like this isn't going to be the change that we want it to be. We aren't going to see the change that we want it to be. We're going to see some difference in, I guess, just the quantity of the content and maybe, I guess, the difficulty. But I don't think anything's going to change in terms of the diversity of the content. Anyways, I've been going off on this for holy shit. Yeah. I'm so sorry if you sat here for an hour. But anyways, have a wonderful evening, morning, night, whatever. I'm gonna get some water. Thank you for watching. I also stream, by the way. I stream every day, almost every day, on YouTube and Twitch. You know, if you've got anything you want to share, like especially in regards to this, if you're still here somehow, you know, I'm happy to always take part in discussions. I've always tried to do my best to reply to everyone. So yeah, feel free to drop a comment or just, you know, drop into the stream and yeah, we can get into it. But yeah, thank you for watching and goodbye.